distinct pleasure tonight to present In Conversation, Surrealism and Its Legacy. We're here tonight with three San Francisco Bay Area talents, and artist Ranu Mukherjee, Jonathan Parker, filmmaker and director and writer, and Stanford curator Jodi Roberts. I have been working in the field of art and surrealism for almost 16 years now, and blending together both contemporary and modern works, and it's without a doubt that the programming we've been doing here in San Francisco has been rooted in surrealism, not just from an imagery or iconography perspective, but really from a literary, conceptual, and narrative perspective. So it was really wonderful tonight when the Cantor Museum was receiving or traveling their show, The Conjured Life, which is on view right now. It was a perfect opportunity because The Conjured Life is all about surrealism and its legacy, not the classical surrealists, what they were all about, how they were trying to communicate, and how so many of today's great artists, both visual artists, filmmakers, writers, have been influenced by these great masterful artists. And I think that is where I'm hoping our conversation is going to end up tonight. We were talking earlier, sorry to steal your thunder, but for those of you who don't know, surreal was the 2016 word of the year. Maybe that has to do with the elections.
Why was that?
Why was that, they say. But I find it quite interesting. And the word surreal is loaded for various reasons, but tonight I think we're here to talk about why many of these artists are being so, for the first time I think now, so well understood and cherished by people working in the art world and in the arts today. Let me start by introducing Ranu Mukherjee. She's a gallery artist here at San Francisco, represented by yours truly, Gallery Wendi Norris. She's based here in San Francisco, and Ranu's work includes hybrid films, paintings, prints on tapestries and silk and all kinds of saris, all kinds of interesting materials. Her work has often focused on cultural convergence and nomadism, among other things. In the past 3 years, she's had solo exhibitions and projects at the LA County Museum of Art, the Asian Art Museum here in San Francisco, and the San Jose Museum of Art. Her work is in prominent collections around the world, museums and private collections, and her hybrid films are currently on view at the Tarbell Art Center in Illinois, where they just inaugurated and opened their first black box program, starting, I think Ron is the second artist to be included in that new program. And her work is also on view, or coming up on view, at the San Jose Museum of Art in a group show. In May of this year, we're presenting her third exhibition here at the gallery, which I'm very excited about. And for those of you who had an opportunity to see her at the de Young, she's recently completed a residency out at the de Young where she was engaging various members of the community and very active and working towards the exhibition we'll have for her here in May. And she's dealing with this life now in a way we've never experienced it before. She's been thinking of the timing and the cadence of her hybrid films, and she coined a word called shadow time in collaboration with the Bureau of Linguistic Reality. They worked with her, and this word called shadow time is something I'm hoping she's going to talk about tonight for the first time ever. And it's really expressing the concept that one can live in concurrent yet contradictory time frames. And I'm really excited about this coin term and how she's manifesting it and visually in her artwork. My good friend and Bay Area writer and filmmaker Jonathan Parker is also with us here tonight. And as many of you may know, he's made several amazing and award-winning films that we've all enjoyed. And when I ask him about his films, I say, hey Jonathan, don't you do you consider your films at all surreal? And his answer was, well, Wendi, absurd incongruities are the basis of comedy and surrealism.
Circulation and the idea of spreading the word of surrealism was key to the agenda from the start. And a primary tool for that was through surrealist publications. So in this initial gallery, we have a selection of surrealist publications, both things published in Paris, in other European cities, in the United States, in cities like Mexico City, that really speak to the international spread of surrealism, especially after 1938, when so many Parisian surrealists in particular ended up in exile. At the very center of this initial gallery is Marcel Duchamp's Boîte à Malise. Now, Duchamp never declared himself to be a surrealist, but he was certainly an intimate of surrealist artists and even organized many showed with them and then organized exhibitions of surrealist art. For those of you who haven't seen a boîte, this is sort of a mini retrospective exhibition. It is a box filled with small-scale replicas of Duchamp's most famous work, which all pack up very nicely and then can be sent around the world. So it, in form and in content, very much embodies the idea of surrealist circulation. Those are set in relation to a project from 1968 called SMS, which is often described as a quote-unquote publication. But again, what you're getting if you're a subscriber to SMS is a box. You can see the boxes up at the top, which is filled, and you're just pulling out small-scale artworks, in this case by a variety of artists. William Copley, who is heading this project, was very clear about his indebtedness to Duchamp in conceiving SMS. And we're getting a whole range of artists. And when you're looking at SMS, especially in the context of the boîte as well, it really underscores the links between, say, pop art, conceptualism, 1960s counterculture, movements that aren't necessarily considered or come to mind right away as heirs to surrealism, but nonetheless are indebted to it. So, surrealism has a very, very big bibliography, as I'm sure you can imagine. It's been the study of very intense historical and scholarly research, really since its foundation. Marcel Jean, who you're seeing over on the walls here, was actually author of one of the first foundational histories of surrealism, published in 1960. And since then, it's been key to our historical study. And so in each of the sections of the show, we've sort of developed one key idea, and then sort of staged an intergenerational conversation between historical surrealists and people working more recently. In the first gallery, we're looking at how surrealists created what we keep calling their own subversive lineages. And like a lot of artists working in avant-gardes of the early 20th century who were very forward-thinking, at least in their rhetoric, the surrealists dove deep into past art, often picking out artists that they thought manifested an interest, a common interest, whether that's in dreams or mythology or the fantastic, and proclaiming them to be essentially proto-surrealists. So in this section, you'll see, for example, Max Ernst. I think we would call it now a graphic novel. And we know that one of the key sources or influences for Ernst as he was thinking through this new type of graphic storytelling was the 19th century artist Max Klinger. So you'll see both of them in conjunction with each other in this section. Also the work on, I guess it's your left, by Buzz Spector, a contemporary artist, really moves this idea of a surrealist research into past art into the present day. His curio cabinet is inscribed with bold letters from, lines from Stéphane Mallarmé's Salut. Stéphane Mallarmé, of course, was a hero of the surrealists. Many historical surrealists had a very intense interest in non-European art and culture. Objects that they, especially indigenous art from the Americas, from Africa, and from Oceania, they would often describe this art as a quote-unquote more authentic alternative to the traditions of the European Academy. It's hugely problematic, but nonetheless absolutely key to understanding surrealism. So in this section, we are placing artists like Victor Bronner, a Romanian artist who, as you can see here, is appropriating Mesoamerican motifs and putting them in dialogue with artists like Wangeti Mutu, who in her work is, first of all, underscoring the violent realities of colonialism, but also reclaiming exactly the type of artifact that the historical surrealists like to collect and use. We have a section on the use of found objects. Many historical surrealists would go on these hunting escapades through city streets, through arcades, through flea markets, looking for totally mundane objects that pique their interest. They would then incorporate those objects into new collages or assemblages with the hope of forcing viewers to rethink their assumptions. We also have a section on surrealist photography and film. And finally, we have a section, a constellation of works that point to surrealist automatism. Both surrealist writers and visual artists were interested in developing art-making techniques that force the creator the maker of those objects to sort of shut down or circumvent the rational mind. Breton and other writers famously advocated automatic writing. In the visual arts, we have people like Wolfgang Palin, who in this beautiful work that came from the gallery, was led by the gallery, work that he called fumage. In its technique, you can see that there are sections of the painting where he's held a candle up to the canvas, letting the smoke make an initial set of marks for which he then adds paint to sort of complete this hallucinatory image. So these are just a few of the sections. There's more, and we hope that you will come down and hope that you'll think through in the course of going through this show, what are these groundbreaking techniques that we associate with 20th century art as hallmarks of 20th century art, and how many of them actually came to the fore with surrealism, even if we've lost sight of that initial grounding.
So it took me a few minutes when Wendi asked me to join this group for the, I think, well, okay, it must be the comedy, because I tend to work in comedy, and if you think about art movements, and you think, well, what art movements use comedy, surrealism would definitely be it, because the Impressionists, you know, we're not comedians, and the abstract expressionists were not comedians. Comedy did come back into art later, obviously, with Warhol and Koons and Hearst and others. Not sure if we should be laughing or crying, but with the surrealists, comedy was certainly a goal, and it's the concept that Wendi mentioned of incongruous juxtapositions. Certainly Max Ernst collages, and Magritte and Duchamp and Dali did a lot of that. You've got a desert scape, and then you've got a melting clock. That's would be an incongruous juxtaposition. So I'm going to show a couple of clips from a film I made called Untitled, which is about a music composer who takes himself very, very seriously. And it is incongruous because his music is performed with what are not typical instruments. So maybe we can just run this first clip.
Are you hot? Is that it? Do you have any idea how distracting that is? Yeah. Would you like to know what it looks like? It looks a little something like this.
I thought the thematic content was pedestrian and the performance was anemic.
40 minutes of pure tedium.
What were you trying to achieve?
The best piece I could.
Emotionally bankrupt with no relation to the way human beings make sense of sound.
Thanks for coming.
Some of his concepts are okay, but I just hate all his work.
The flag was good.
No, the flag worked.
In the course of that scene, the composer meets the young woman who was fanning herself in the audience, who has she's an art gallerist, and she's so taken with his work that she invites him to perform at the gallery. And so this next clip is he's visiting the gallery for the first time.
It's easy to see why Ray's a star. What do you think of the work? His narratives are so powerful. It was a coup to get this show. His immortality is already assured.
No! Set! What is that? Where is your tone? Huh? The movement, Seth, the movement must come from here. Swing from the hips. You feel the difference? Mm-hmm. You do it with conviction, and then finish it off with a soft caress. Mm-hmm. From the dead weight of the hips, you get a much more carnal tone, right? And then the soft finish on the follow through, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Better. Just. I hate everything I've ever written. Okay, and Anastasia, at measure 13, yeah, the 16-note figure is a staccato, right? Yeah?
Who wrote this shit?
I'm sorry?
It's shit.
I'll tell you what, if it's not indicated at measure 13, you can just go ahead and write that.
Stupid! A man kicking a can?
Well, it's a bucket, but...
I sang with the Moscow Symphony.
No, I know.
Are you trying to make me look ridiculous?
No.
You're trying to sabotage me.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I am, no,
I'm... What are you doing? Put it back!
You should probably...
And don't touch it! Who asked you to touch it?
Jeff, you can just... leave it there. I'll tell you what, why don't we all just, maybe, I don't know, take a deep breath, I guess.
You know what? Don't talk to me anymore. Don't address me directly. If you have something to say, talk to the clarinet.
The clarinet?
Just ask her when she's ready.
You ready?
Yes.
You can see it's always a dilemma when your work is either ahead of its time or just simply no good.
This is a piece called Phantasmagoria. That title actually came from looking at my bookshelf while I was trying to find a title, and Marina Warner's book, Phantasmagoria, kind of stood out at my eyes while I was trying to find a title. But I think it says a lot about the sort of nature of the work, and maybe about the connection to surrealism as well. This piece is a 3-channel video that's normally commissioned by the LA County Museum of Art, and it's normally shown on 3 screens. And
it also came out of a large project I did with the Asian Art Museum, curated by Mark Mayer, who is here tonight. And that project was all looking at the gold rush and the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then this video came out of it, and the whole work, you can start it actually and just play it while I'm talking. But this particular work, this is just clips, so it's not completely the whole piece. The whole piece is 21 minutes. But the work started at the mouth of a cave on the Yuba River, which looked like this very primordial cave, and it had been created through the blast of a hydraulic mining event. And so I started off by kind of making, like unmaking the image of the cave and remaking it into something else as a way of also unmaking the image that we have of the gold rush and trying to make another one. So I think that my work has a lot to do with that idea of making and unmaking images. And images being sort of both pictorial and also the kind of abstractions or ephemeral things that folk through our minds when we think of something. So, so this piece, the cave is sort of broken up into pieces and moving around, and then there are also the images of the objects that come out of gold mining at the other end of this process. A lot of my work has to do with clashing together these different sort of experiences of time and experiences of speed, and also to do with the construction of culture and how that happens through the movement of people and things and through our relationship with ecology. This iteration of the work, slightly different than what happened at the Asian Art Museum because of this coyote that came in to the sort of landscape of the project. A lot of times bodies in my work are silhouettes. And so here the body of the animal is a space for the viewer to project into. I think a lot about trying to make work which enacts on the body as well as the mind simultaneously. And there's also often there's a discussion with historical and futuristic images coming together at the same time. So I was going to talk a bit about surrealism. I spent my undergraduate doing painting until I discovered experimental film, and then I started working in experimental film and also taking classes that had to do with ethnography and a critique of ethnography. And so, was kind of saturated in things like Buñuel and That Bread and other works like that from Europe. And also thinking about the practice of ethnography and sort of the professors that I was talking to were people who would do ethnographic films in order to sort of siphon funds in order to go and do other projects, but were also interested in sort of destabilizing notions of ethnography and otherness. So that's kind of been something that's been with me for a long time. And then I went to London to do my graduate work and spent 11 years there. And while I was doing my graduate work, I was at the Royal College of Art in the painting school, and there was a really anti-intellectual climate at the time there. And so myself and a group of other people who were really interested in thinking, and I came into graduate school not as a finishing school, but because I had a lot of questions about what images are and what they are, how they're functioning in culture, or how they were functioning in culture at the time. I think I still think a lot about that. And so I had questions that I wanted to talk to people about, and it seemed like this weird, people were asking me why I was going to lectures, and I was like, where am I? This is graduate school. So we started with this group where I was working amongst other artists and PhD students, and it was led by John Steziker, the collage artist. So that's somebody who definitely was affected by the legacy of Surrealism in his own work. And then within that group, my partner at the time, the person who became my partner, was working on his PhD on Bataille and horror films, and then another very close friend was working on a PhD on science and Surrealism. So that kind of thought was very much sort of part of what was going on in the context of myself kind of thinking about images and what they were, and also the sort of period of like the world wars and the effect of the world wars on European culture. So that was kind of the context which I suppose I was formed in a certain way, and so close to that in a way it made me think a lot about the differences from that. I subsequently was working for 10 years as part of a collective artist. There were 4.5 of us, we said, working as under one name, and kind of thinking about authorship and also about the technology that was coming into the world at the time. It was the 90s. It was the beginning of internet technology and communications changing. But I remember feeling that to be associated with Surrealism was somehow delegitimizing at the time, because in a way the things that were happening felt so strange that, you know, we didn't want them to be seen as fiction, or if you were making work that was non-objective, right, or sort of non-minimalist, that it was sort of seen as some kind of fantasy. And so I remember having those feelings, and it was so, you know, I think it also had to do with, I taught at Goldsmiths for a very long time, and a lot of the faculty came at the work, at looking at work through psychoanalysis, which was something that I was very at odds with. And so I think the proximity of all of that made me think about the difference and come to this conclusion that, you know, what was described as the unconscious at some point had actually been sort of manifested into the built environment and also into media culture and the sort of communications technology. And so I felt like the sort of subconscious was all around us, that we were living in this sea of it, which I think maybe I still kind of feel like that, and it maybe has gotten even more apparent. But also the connection, I feel now, like the connections between like the way that I work with the fragment and the way that I put things together that come from these different realms, news media and mythology, and the way that I'm also still trying to sort of destabilize the centrality of the European vision and sort of mix it up in a way that matches the population that I feel like I'm part of, certainly come from that legacy. So yeah, I think that's sort of where I stand now. And then just to say a little bit about this word, I was going to show some images of the static work as well, which, you know, I think importantly about my static work is that I use color as a form of motion in the static work. And then this word that we invented, shadow time, is, I worked with the Bureau for Linguistic Reality, who are a group of people here that help people coin words for things that we have feelings for, but we don't have a word for yet. A lot of it started with this idea about the Anthropocene and climate change, and the idea that we might be going into a really different kind of future. And so the word that I coined was shadow time, which had to do with this feeling of living in multiple senses of time or speed at the same time, at the same moment, which feels now like it has another entire set of meanings attached to it. So it also, I think the thing about that word is that it really is, for me, a contemporary version of the uncanny, that's the feeling that I'm trying to describe.
I actually just want to build off what Ranu was saying about notions of what surrealism is. Like, one of our anxieties in working on the show is walking through, especially with certain contemporary artists, being like, is this person really going to be okay with being in a surrealist show? I mean, is Cindy Sherman okay with me calling her a surrealist? And other things, because it's a word that we all think we know, we all recognize right away and act as though we understand, but could take on so many different meanings and has alternately been very positive and very negative at different times. So you mentioned some of your anxieties about the idea of surrealism being applied to your practice. I wanted to ask Jonathan if he's ever thought about that. Both of you have had the word surrealist sort of laid down in analyses of your work without a lot of further analysis.
Yeah, I've had the word applied to a couple of my films, and very proud of it.
I mean, I have to say, I don't have a problem at all with the association now. I used to, you know, it was a proximity where you have to differentiate at the time. I think that happens to me all the time when I'm doing collage, for sure. Because I think when you're making collage, you're tapping directly into that legacy. So, but I don't know if I can think of like a real specific. Yeah, I mean, it's more like don't do that person's work, right? Like you can't make this other person's work.
And to highlight too that both of you work in multiple art forms, right? So, Jonathan, I know you started out as a musician, is that correct? Moving into filmmaking, Ranu is working on still images, painting, photography, film, which made me think a lot about surrealism because it stands out for the breadth of its impact. It affected so many different art forms. And I was just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how your different practices inform one another and how they sort of generate new ideas and how thinking across media can be productive.
Shifting to making music videos that were comic and then films was an important transition for me to make. And I guess I keep coming back to comedy because that's kind of what the art form that I tend to think in. And I think there is so much comedy in surrealist art. It's really and you know, ever since Wendy suggested coming in to do this, I really have been thinking quite a lot about that, and it's pretty that's pretty unique aspect for a movement of art to be trying to get a laugh, basically, and of course the artistic execution of it. Some people feel like, okay, comedy, that's a low art form, but to me, I consider it a high art form, and so it's nice to really trace those comedic impulses in the surrealists. It lends it a little bit of class.
I think for me, moving back and forth between moving and static images is like pretty central to the way I work. And I do that while I'm making, I make work in relationship to each other. The moving images and the static images are made in relationship to the other. And I think that really has to do with abstraction and movement because I'm working with pictorial images that have references and also trying to kind of break them apart and reconfigure them. I think often when I'm doing that on one surface, the other surface explains to me how to kind of break a point where things are, I don't know, getting stuck or are too representational or something like that. So like the motion of the films talks to me about space and the static.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about the idea of the fragment and why that struck you as something that connected you to surrealism?
Yeah, I think this idea of for very obvious reasons, like putting things together from different spaces or places or frames of reference. But I think it's also something to do with the idea of, I think that period of time, after 2 world wars, where things were really broken down, there's something about sort of trying to maybe put things back together, but only having fragments. And in a certain way, I think even when I'm looking at a whole image, it's for me like a fragment of a condition that's much larger than it, right? So like looking at that cave image, for instance, like I wouldn't be able to just like show the image of the cave, because the cave is this kind of, is it's a form of evidence of this other whole event that happened at a scale that's too big for us to really fathom. And I feel like that really, I mean, I think maybe the surrealists call that the subconscious or the unconscious, but that realm where, you know, everything expands in proportion is
The significance
is,
expands.
yeah, the significance expands, and this sort of expansiveness is what's really important to me about the fragment. That like it does, and so if you have a whole image, it somehow closes that down, and it also feels, you know, it doesn't make sense to me. Like there's the sense of what comes through fragments in a sense, because I think that's how we perceive things now.
So another thing that that keeps coming through when you look at surrealism is the degree to which it's so collaborative in nature. Whether you're looking at publications and how designers and wordsmiths of various sorts and visual artists are playing off of each other, or games like The Exquisite Corpse, where you get these surprises by sort of lending your creativity to someone else. Filmmaking, I'm assuming, is an inherently collaborative process. And Ranu, I know you've done collaborative projects as well. And I wonder if you could just talk to us about some of the surprises that come out of working that way.
Yeah, I mean, you're with a film, you've got an army of 60, 70, 80 people coming together to do a thing, and it's amazing where ideas come from, because it's really helpful to remain open to it, because lines of dialogue and scene ideas will just come from everywhere. The person holding the boom, or in any corner, and it's really interesting. First, it's just there's a logistical side to feature filmmaking that is akin to sending an army into battle. It's really quite a challenge, and the fact that you're doing that for, instead of a destructive purpose, to do it for a creative purpose, where you literally have 60, 70, and everybody is an artist and a craftsperson, and the collaboration is total and really very, very exciting, because you can't possibly have control the entire thing. There are lots of things change. The minute actors show up, no matter how carefully you've conceived your movie, everything changes, because now all of a sudden you've got real people playing their part, and they're looking at the thing from a different perspective. They're looking at it from the legitimacy of their own character, and you know, very interesting and magical things happen. Yeah, totally collaborative.
I don't remember the question exactly, but I think collaboration, you know, for a long time it was my whole practice, and I don't know if I feel like anything really happens, and like I don't know if anything gets made in isolation. I think I kind of don't believe in that there's like really single authors anymore, but I think collaboration is about tension. So I think that when you have, you know, you're like, okay, you know, for me now, most of the time, I do still collaborate a little bit, but when I'm collaborating, it's mostly with people who are like participating in something. Like I've just had people embrace each other while they're rolling on the floor for a new video. And like there's again, a situation like you're talking about where you can't totally control, you know, how the awkwardness of bodies and what they're going to look like and how they're going to move is something that I wouldn't be able to make up. So I think I like the fact of just having something that's almost factual at the core of work that's being put together and the way that I put things together.
Yeah, I like the idea of tension. I think that there's a lot of that in surrealism too.
Yeah.
Playing off contradictions.
Yeah, I mean, the whole time I worked with a collective, it was all, like, everything got produced through tension, because we didn't all have the same vision always, or agree always, so.
Anytime you're collecting people together and making them spend 12, 14 hours in a single place, the tension is definitely a big factor, and you can almost count it like clockwork on a production where the lead actor will have his or her moment, will just throw a complete fit, and everybody will stand there and watch it, and then everybody will go back to work, and everything's just fine. There's a lot of interesting, but it's a very creative tension, so it's an exciting storm to be at the eye of.
Well, we want to give you a chance to ask questions as well, so does anyone want to start us off?
How are your works viewed? How do I, as a seeker of art or
Oh, well, I'm having a show here in May. They're viewed usually in gallery spaces or museums.
no, but I mean, is it a video?
So that piece is a 3-channel video, so it normally gets viewed on 3, well, at the time that it's been shown, this is a fairly big piece, so it's been shown on 3 screens. And
Meant to be on video.
Yeah, so they're shown projected usually, if possible, and yeah.
Is a contemporary version of the Uncanny, and I wonder if you could just speak more about that.
You have ambitions, you're going somewhere, you have a schedule, but also that there is this, I feel the real possibility that stuff could be totally different, that we could be living very soon in a completely different world. I think a lot of people feel like that right now, because I'm not even sure we know what the present is right now, but which is, I think that, the uncanny had to do with that sort of strangeness in the everyday, and I just think that that's kind of here, and maybe it's here to stay, I don't know, So I guess it's to do with that, and a lot of it is to do with it can be to do with things like having so much news about so many things all the time produces that feeling, because you could live a number of different lives. It could be this idea that we might not have any fossil fuels in 10 years, like some basic stuff like that, like the whole structure. I mean, there's a lot of conversations about the entire structure of the way that we live being unsustainable. And then we have the political spectrum, so I don't think that's new actually, but it's, So yeah, it's about that feeling that things are like, you're in the life, but like, is it really solid or something?
I don't know of artists right now who are thinking through a surrealist lens in terms of artificial intelligence or virtual reality, which isn't to say it doesn't exist, just that I'm not aware of it. Ranu, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that, except that I hope that it becomes kind of multi-sensory virtual reality. I mean, I am totally fascinated. I haven't seen an Oculus yet, but I really want to.
Yeah, cheaper.
They're cheaper now, and I'm curious, but I also feel like there's this sort of, the tactile that happens, even if it's happening through vision, is super important. So I think that, I'd like to see the, somehow biotech also catching up with the vision-oriented technologies. But that's sort of a desire. I mean, I don't know what really will happen. I hope it goes in a kind of...
So it also brings the idea of collaboration, because it's so technical.
Right.
So just the
artists
you provide the content.
Yeah.
When you talk to people who deal with virtual reality, everybody is saying, oh, we need I'm a content developer, I'm looking for new content and so forth. So it seems like it's in the air.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think there's tons of potential.
Should we take one more question?
I saw a question in the back.
Okay. And go ahead, or if someone wants to project.
Speak
loudly. Sorry.
2 questions, if I may. One for Jonathan. You mentioned that filmmaking comedy, it is an art. Your opinion on why in our culture we don't appreciate comedy, especially with the Oscars, for example. So the question is, what's your opinion on if the Oscars not giving awards to comedy filmmaking? That's question 1. And then the other question is for you. In your video, you have some it seems like it's the videos it's captured in time. You have some items there that are probably 10 years old. I saw like iPhone and a mobile phone. Is that made on purpose, or are you concerned that over time your video will become aged and people say, oh, that's a really old video because look at these old artifacts? Is that done purposely?
I think they are artifacts. So they're definitely, I mean, they're kind of cutouts of artifacts, and so I think they stand in the work as artifacts of the time that they were produced in. And so, you know, there's like this clash of time scales in that work where one of the time scales has to do with those rocks and the mining blast and the gold that like took billions of years to form and then comes out into these objects which were actually very short-lived. So that's kind of part of the point of the work. So I'm not so worried about the work being dated through those objects because I don't think you can include objects like that without having them dated, and also that's part of their nature. I think that's an important part of their nature.
It's an interesting question about comedy and film awards. I was watching the Golden Globes the other night, and Matt Damon pointed out that in the Golden Globes, of course, there is a comedy and musical category, and he won it last year for The Martian, which he admits is really not funny at all. And there's no singing or anything. So, but sometimes you have to think of, you have to kind of redefine what is a comedy too when it comes to award givings. The greatest, I mean, one of the great filmmakers, Stanley Kubrick, if you look at his work, I mean, those are comedies. Dr. Strangelove, Lolita, even Clockwork Orange. Obviously, it's got a lot of other stuff in it too, but we were even just talking about Clockwork Orange earlier this evening because during the famous or infamous rape scene, the woman is beaten with a giant sculpture of a penis. So there is that's sometimes your reaction is not necessarily to laugh, but he structures his films like comedy, and that's kind of a pretty major goal. I mean, the Coen brothers also are essentially comedic filmmakers, and they've certainly collected their share of awards. So I'm not so sure that it doesn't get recognized when it is crosses over and it's clearly excellent filmmaking.
Well, thank you all very much. There is wine in the back, yes. And we'll be around. So if you have any other questions, please let us know. Thank you very much.